that's it for the East. We've got to roll on. We said 30 minutes. We're 23 minutes in, and we still got to do the West. So let's talk about the West really fast. Let's go in reverse this time. Give me your top team in the West. We'll start there.
So my top team in the West is Alabama, which shouldn't shock anyone. As a show or a podcast, we tend to follow good football. We talk about good football teams. We like to recognize teams that are really good and just sort of track what's going on in the sport. At this point, if you aren't picking Alabama to win the conference, you're almost throwing away your money if you were a bettor, right? I mean, they've been so consistent and so good, and everybody wants to see them lose, but they haven't. And in particular, this year, they could be really, really good. Now, they're thin. Their linebacking core is extremely thin. They've had a couple injuries already in fall camp. A couple other teams have too. But when you look at the offensive talent, I don't know that we've ever seen an Alabama team that actually has this much offensive talent, which is kind of incredible to say. But they've got a 5-star quarterback. They're probably going to have multiple 5-stars at receiver. They're going to have multiple 5-stars at running back. They have multiple 5-stars in the offensive line. They're just abso-freaking-lutely loaded to the point where it's just unfair. And honestly, in my view, injury is about the only thing that could stop them. Now, that's not a minor thing because it's only going to take a few injuries to cripple them.
Yeah, November last year, we saw exactly what could happen when that happens.
Right. They don't have the depth that they had 2 or 3 years ago. But if you're looking at just pure starters, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting to watch because it's going to be kind of like walking on, avoiding a landmine all year for them. They're going to either stay healthy and make the playoff, or they're going to lose a couple guys and they could really, really fall off.
And as we get into the West, I think it's going to show sort of the problem that Alabama has, sort of like they had last year that almost kept them out of the national championship game, in that Alabama theoretically, and we haven't talked about where you've got Auburn yet. I've got Auburn second. Alabama could lose to Auburn in November, get left out of everything because of the rest of the SEC being at least perceived, but probably actually a good bit down. And the fact that with no Lamar Jackson, the Louisville game will potentially work against them, kind of like Florida State worked against them last year. So they have that super thin margin. And if they have injuries at the wrong time, which is exactly what happened last year, they very well could get left out of the national championship discussion. What do you think?
I would agree. And, you say injuries at the wrong time, but if you lose a linebacker, he's going to be gone for the rest of the season. I mean, if you're talking about a major injury, right? So, as you said, if they just get hurt second to last game of the year, then that could be enough to knock them out. And I have Auburn too, by a significant margin as the second best team in the SEC West.
And if we're talking about tiers, and we can get into Auburn now as well. If we're talking about tiers, would you have Alabama in a different tier from Auburn and then the rest of the SEC in separate tiers, or would you have Alabama and Auburn in the same tier?
I have Alabama as a different tier.
Okay.
So I have them alone in tier 1, and then I have Auburn in the West alone with tier 2, which is the same tier I have Georgia in.
Okay. And Auburn for me is second. I have some concerns at running back, especially given Malzahn's history of, even we saw it last year, he got that quarterback in Stidham that he wanted. And we talked about his stops along the way at previous with previous offenses at previous schools where he's wanted to do the air raid thing. He's dying to do the air raid thing. But the thing that is really successful for Gus and has been proven to be so at Auburn is the power run game. And he had it last year. We saw what happened when Johnson got hurt. And I think Cam Martin's a good back, but I think he's more of an electrifying back and not a pound it kind of back, not a power run back, and they're thin at running back. And the other question they have is the other place that Auburn needs to be great, and that's offensive line. I think we've seen a couple years now that Gus can field a good defense, if not at times great defense, that can keep them afloat if their offense struggles. We saw last year what happened while it took a while for that Auburn offensive line to gel. We saw that disaster against Clemson, where I think honestly with Kelly Bryant, where he was struggling at the beginning of the year, if Auburn's offensive line was there, they could have beaten Clemson pretty well. So that's my concern with Auburn is running back and offensive line. Everywhere else, I think they're pretty good. Actually, wide receiver, they're better than we thought they would be. So is that where you see Auburn as well? Are those your concerns, or do you have others?
I think that's pretty consistent, and there's a couple things there. One, so Prince Tego Wanogo, if I pronounce that right, was started in that Clemson game, right? And they pulled him later in the year, put another guy in at tackle. They started doing a lot better. One of my concerns is a lot of the guys they brought back struggled, and one thing we keyed on last year is at linebacker Montavious Atkinson. When he came into the field, it was usually not a good thing for Auburn's defense. When they had Deshaun Davis and Trey Williams got banged up, it wasn't good when that ended up forcing Atkinson on the field. It was kind of a tell. So I am a little concerned because again, there are too many guys. If you had to see Cam Martin at running back, it wasn't going to be good. If you saw Winogo at tackle, it wasn't going to be good. Atkinson, that if they were a tell that they were going to struggle in a given series last year, that makes me think them being a full-time starter this year is not a good thing. And as you said, and as we've said before, I don't know that the running quarterback thing is actually as important in some ways as it is that when they have a running quarterback, it makes Malzahn run a run-first power offense.
Right.
And when he's had a passing quarterback, he gets cute. And that Clemson game, I think every Auburn fan on the planet was pretty frustrated last year. And it took him a while to sort of settle down and hand the reins over, and they finally went back to more of a pounded football
I
team,
think
and
it
they were
took the
better.
LSU loss because he got cute that game too, and I think that loss really turned it around and forced his hand.
Right. And, it. I think there's real concerns because they leaned so heavily on Kerryon Johnson, Braden Smith, and Golson. And when they leaned on those guys, they were good, and when they didn't, they weren't. But all that said, at the end of the day, Auburn may have the best D line in the SEC. They have a lot of returning starters defensively. Like you said, the receiving core is a lot better probably than was anticipated. Granted, they've been really banged up in fall camp, but it's really unclear if those injuries are going to be overly permanent right now. And Stidham is a solid quarterback. So I still think they're a very good team. And anytime you have an elite defensive line, you're going to be a really good football team in college football. That's just the way it is. But, kind of to your point, Auburn was a playoff team at the end of last year, up until the point where Kerryon Johnson got hurt, really, which, in my view, probably cost them the SEC championship game because they were just a different player with him healthy. And they could be a little more like the team they were the first half of the year than the team they were the second half of the year when they were an elite football team. And again, I had them thumping LSU. I thought Auburn. I really thought Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia last year, if you go back and watch our videos, were in a league of their own. And I thought all three were serious playoff contenders. This year, I just think Auburn and Georgia probably take a little bit of a step back from that. And Auburn may find themselves, and often do find themselves under Malzahn late in the year, a little bit due to the way they run their offense and the way Malzahn, frankly, practices the offense, where they give their guys a ton of reps, and they end up being usually one of the more functional offenses by the end of the season because they keep things simple. But, until that offensive line sort of gels, and really, in my view, until they find a guy that's a true power back that can run that power style of offense, I'm going to stay concerned.
And with Auburn, we might see some of what we talked about earlier with Georgia, in that they might take a step back, but because the rest of their division is so poor or not up to stuff, it might not show in the win-loss column. So is there anybody else in that tier with Auburn, or do we need to drop down to another tier? And if so, which of those teams are we talking about?
So I do drop from a tier from there, and my next tier, and I would say probably in order, is Mississippi State, LSU, and Texas A&M. I have all in the third tier, and compared to the East, I have them in the same tier as I have Florida and South Carolina.
So it's interesting to me because I do think there's a lot of chatter about Mississippi State potentially finishing second, maybe giving Bama a run at the end of the year, challenging for the West. I know Bruce Feldman picked Mississippi State to beat Auburn and to finish second in the West this year. I think last year with their season, there were some hidden flaws even before Fitzgerald went down that we're not seeing. But I also like that they're returning a lot of guys on both sides of the ball, a lot of guys that contributed a lot. But I do think you've got a new coaching staff coming in. We don't know if that's good or bad. We know the guy leaving was good. I don't think anybody would argue that losing Dan Mullen in most cases for your team is not a great thing. I actually have Mississippi State in a tier, if we're doing tiers, by themselves after Auburn, ahead of LSU and A&M, and I'm almost willing to put LSU even further past in another tier beyond A&M. I think, and I know we could talk a little more about Mississippi State. We talked a lot in the coaching part, and we got to move pretty fast. I want to talk about LSU and the potential of there to be an absolute train wreck this year. I think they've got enough talent to keep it from completely derailing it, but combined with the fact that you and I both are just dying to have that I told you so moment, because we recorded a video that I think 9 people watched about Orgeron being a horrible mistake for bringing on full time. I think combined with him and their absolutely brutal schedule, LSU fans might be in for a long year. What do you think?
I would agree. I'll take one step back and spend 5 seconds to say my concern with Mississippi State is pass defense, for what it's worth, because they had 3 games where they gave up 13 yards per attempt or more. They either stopped you with their front 7 or they didn't stop you. But other than that, they're a really good team. They're really sound. You look at LSU defensively, should have everything sort of on check as well. They're a really talented defense. They're a really talented team. I just like you. I have no confidence in that coaching staff. And I mean, on paper, they should be really good. You know, I've tried to do a little bit of research on Burrow. I was impressed by the guy. I'll be very surprised if Burrow wasn't the starter from what I saw. He looks like a pretty good quarterback, and that's the first time they've had a pretty good quarterback in some time. But the problem with that is I just don't have any confidence they're going to be able to do anything with it. And I've been going back and forth on whether, you know, maybe I was underestimating the team and maybe they were going to turn a corner. And then I heard rumblings from this past weekend of the scrimmage results at LSU. And the quarterbacks, I think, had like 38% passing in that scrimmage. And all the talk is that the defense has been dominant. And I get that the defense is probably really good. I don't necessarily buy that the defense is going to be substantially better than they were last year, in large part just because, you know, they were pretty darn good last year. You know, Arden Key, Christian LeCouture, Greg Gilmore, Dante Jackson, those are really good players. And I know they're going to replace them with good players, and some of the other guys are going to step up. But I don't necessarily think they're going to greatly surpass what they had the prior year. I think really Dave Aranda is the thing keeping this ship afloat.
And you've had your criticisms of Aranda in the past too.
Yeah, I mean, he's really aggressive, and they've been good and bad, and at times they really struggled defending the run last year, particularly when they had injuries at the defensive line. They're thinner this year, so that's going to be a really interesting thing to see as well, because if he, if Rashard Lawrence misses time again, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to handle that. But, I mean, offensively, you shouldn't have 38% passing in a game, and I have no confidence in Ensminger's ability to run an offense. I think Matt Canada really kind of used a lot of smoke and mirrors. We talked about this quite a bit. All that motion stuff and all the things he did allowed them to generate an offense when they were completely one-dimensional. He found a way to utilize the talent and gives them enough window dressing that they could be a one-dimensional offense and not quite one-dimensional in the way he defended them. Obviously, the Troy game, when they took away control, didn't turn out very well, which I thought was very telling. And now they're going to go turning to the style of offense that, the style of offense that lost them the Troy game. That's what they're doing. So that's all really troubling. Combine that with losing a guy like Geist that's really good. They've had some issues at receiver. They've got One of the receivers ends up, getting, I think, just got suspended. And there's a lot hanging on the transfer of Jonathan Giles, but I'm with you. There are some red flags in the personnel that they might take a step back. They didn't have a particularly successful season last year. As good as they were, they still ended up going 9-3 with a loss to Troy. They lost to Notre Dame in the Citrus Bowl. And there were flashes of what they could be, but there are also flashes of a bad team in there on and off. I don't know. I don't see them not taking a step back, and everything seems to point to that.
Yeah, and we thought the Orgeron hire was a disaster, and if there was any doubt of that, his offensive coordinator decisions last year with Canada, which I thought Canada was a great hire. He may not have done a lot of the things that everybody loved all the time, but I thought it was a good hire. The way he handled Canada last year and who he went out and hired this year, he basically hired his buddy. And this is what McElwain did at Florida with Nussmeier. He refused to fire his buddy, and it cost him. I think this is going to be – so you've had a team that has struggled offensively for a really long time, and you go out and hire a disaster hire. It is a disaster hire, I'm telling you right now, on offense, to run your offense. It's not going to end well. We were already low on the coaching staff as it was, and then they went out added Insminger. So I can't get my head around it.
Yep, total agreement there. And I have them where they're at, just purely on talent, and because the defense is talented enough that should be really good. They're still more talented than most every team they play, outside of Alabama and probably Auburn. But it wouldn't shock me if this is kind of the year where the wheels fall off, frankly.
I think, and for the wheels falling off in LSU, it's 6-6. Like that kind of season, I think is because you've got so much talent and you've got Dave Aranda that I think 6-6 is the wheels falling off, and I think that's what they're looking at. I could see them beating Miami. You remember the Wisconsin game? I think it was 2 years ago because they opened with BYU last year, so I think it was 2 years ago where it was like an ugly, ugly game. And they lost at the very end. They could have won, but it would have been like 17-13, something like that. I could see them beating
Jordan Jefferson threw a stupid interception late in the game. Yeah.
I could see them beating Miami because Miami really struggled with decent defenses last year. Like really, really, really struggled. They had a couple of games where they out of their mind and just it all clicked. But I could see them losing to or beating Miami and then having a disaster season inside the SEC. If they don't win that Miami game, and if they come out and roll out a 13-17 loss type clunker, I really fear for LSU fans having a struggle bus year. I've got A&M ahead of them in both tier and order. I think not only is Jimbo Fisher walking into a better situation, I obviously think he's a better coach and better equipped to handle the SEC West. Do you think A&M fans should be patient this year, or this is a year that they can already be excited about?
I think they should be patient, and I think this is a year where they're probably going to have a couple really good games, and they're going to show some flashes of being a really good team. And the hardest part as fans is going to be able to be understanding that the team has holes. So there's going to be certain games where they get the right matchups, and they're going to look pretty good. And then there's going to be other games where they just, kind of suck. And you're going to kind of wonder what happened there. But, last year they started pretty well in certain categories, but they couldn't defend the pass very well. And the run defense fell off as the season progressed, but the pass defense wasn't great throughout the whole year. And I'm kind of concerned about how they're going to do without Amani Watts, and because he was so important to what they were able to do on the defensive end. And they return a lot of players, but that's not always a good thing when you have players that struggled the year prior, right? So I think they, fans have to be patient in that you're going to have some success and you're going to want to kind of jump on the bandwagon, maybe a little similar to how Alabama was in 2007, where they came out and they started the year pretty well under Saban and then really fell off at the end of the year and ended up being a pretty mediocre team. and I could see them pretty similar. That there's flashes of what they may become, but um, they just don't have the star power offensively. They don't have this a solid back seven, and it could honestly well be, given the losses at receiver and whatnot. If Jimbo Fisher can't make these quarterbacks work out, they may not be a very good team in general. So you definitely have to have patience with Texas A&M.
So real quick, we're running out of time, but you were high on Chad Morris in our discussions earlier about coaches, and you're high on the quarterback situation at Ole Miss. So are you willing to go on the record as putting Arkansas ahead of Ole Miss in your tiers or rankings, or not so fast?
Yeah, not so fast. Ole Miss is still pretty talented offensively, um, not just quarterback, but also receivers and just an overall offensive unit. Even with the departures, is still pretty darn good. It'll be really curious to see how they handle all the turmoil, because I think it's gonna have a bigger impact, I think, in some ways this year than last year, because they've lost a whole bunch of players and it's going to change the mindset of the team. But yeah, Arkansas is a rebuilding job, frankly. They return an offensive line, which is great, but the offensive line really, really struggled last year. They don't have much star power on the offensive side of the football. Getting Cornelius maybe healthy and some of the other guys might matter, but it's really unclear what the quarterback situation is. But at the end of the day, and I know we're kind of on the same page with this, both Arkansas and Ole Miss, the defenses need to be completely overhauled. And until that happens, they're not going to climb out of the basement. Ole Miss has enough firepower offensively that they might be able to steal a win or two. I don't think Arkansas is there, and it's going to take some time to get there. And, when your defenses are this poor, frankly, it puts you in every game in a hole. And I just don't see Arkansas having the firepower to climb out of that hole most every game this year.
I agree. I think it's going to take a year or two for them to get where they need to be in terms of what Arkansas fans are used to is good seasons in the SEC West and being in games that they shouldn't, or being in games building a team enough that they can sneak up and beat somebody that was assumed top tier, or at least being in the game. Because I know, like Alabama, they gave Alabama some crazy good games a couple years ago. All right, so I think that's it for us this week. We're really happy to be back, and obviously the offseason shows didn't pan out like we planned. It's just we're here every week, and we're committed to every week throughout the year, and that's a grind for us. We both have very demanding jobs and home lives, so this is a passion project for us, but we love doing it, and we are committed to a third season of doing this and talking through our time limits and getting nerdy with y'all. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking us out this preseason. Look forward to doing a lot of preseason previews next week for week one. Y'all have a great week, and God bless.